eddies, trout are rising over the mayfly, and the sun is shining down on the valley. Hope to be a fly fish till the day that I die. Spring has thawed out the long bitter winter. The water is clear and the skies are blue. I'm standing in the middle of the Beaver Kill River. Might even catch and release one or two. Well, some folks like...
Well, you know, everything that almost everything you can find in a book, the standard Catskill style flies that are listed in books as standards over the years, certainly I tie those. But also have been able to tweak some of those patterns, parachutes, different type materials, where dry flies without hackle, using primarily snowshoe rabbit's foot has become one of my favorite materials for tying. And it's durable, it's buoyant, and for dry flies and emerger type flies that seem to be the rage today and are effective, it's a wonderful material to use.
what are you going to show us here first?
Well, I'm going to tie what I call a funny emerger, and the reason for the name, it's P-H-U-N-N-Y. The PH is for the pheasant tail that I'm going to use for the tail and the abdomen, and the unny part, subtracting the B, is from the snowshoe rabbit's foot that we'll use for the wing, hence the bunny part. So we're going to tie a snowshoe rabbit's foot emerger, or a funny emerger, tied to coincide with the Hendrickson hatch. So we'll attach the thread to the hook and proceed. Select a suitable clump of fibers from the center tail of a ringneck pheasant, and this will form the tails and the abdomen. Now that you've got the tails put in, all you have to do to form the abdomen is simply wrap the rest of the fiber towards the eye of the hook. And you want to leave yourself enough room for the wing to be tied in and a thorax. Now that's trimmed. You want to cover the bare shank with thread so the hair doesn't slip around on you. Snowshoe rabbit's foot has already been trimmed. For those of you who haven't used this material before, when you buy a snowshoe rabbit's foot, there's a lot of spiky hair. Let me reach over here and grab one I haven't started yet. You'll see all this spiky white hair along the edge. Just trim that away. You want the soft, fluffy stuff that's contained inside the leg and the foot. Reverse it so you're working with the butts, not the tips. Pull out all the short, fuzzy fibers. We'll reduce the bulk a little bit. Trim the tips. And tie it in tightly. The snowshoe hair is very dense and kind of hard and slippery, and it want to roll around the shank on you if you don't really secure it tightly. Now the wing is in, and it's a little bit too long, so because you're using the butts, you don't have to be afraid about trimming it. Just trim it to the length you want, and that looks much better.
That was something I was just going to ask you. A lot of folks use the tips.
That's fine if that's your preference. It allows me to be able to trim without losing the effect of the tips. Plus, back here, this seems a little bit fluffier, and it's more easily visible when you're fishing an emerger that you want to hang in the surface film. You can see this little tuft of hair sticking up. It's a little bit brighter, and it's more easily visible when you're fishing the fly. And anytime you can see your fly.
And you're also using a red thread?
This is a unit thread. It's called rust brown or rusty brown. I try to match the thread to complement the color of the fly that I'm tying. Okay. I've got my version of Hendrickson dubbing. This is a blend of several colors of beaver dubbing. I get it from a company in Canastota, New York, not too far away from Binghamton, Mad River Dubbing Company. And it's good stuff. And you just build up your thorax. And I like simple patterns. Just that quickly, I'll double half hitch it, that way I won't, oops, I just blew that one. We'll just use a little dab of Zap-A-Gap here to finish the fly, and that fly is completed. Now from start to finish, if you were to, without the breaks and the conversation and such, a fly like that should take you about a minute and a half to tie. It's easy to tie, it's got minimal material cost, and if you break one off, if it only takes you a minute and a half to tie, well, it doesn't hurt so bad to lose one.
Right.
But there's a Hendrickson Funny Emerger.
What time of the year would you use that one?
Hendrickson in this part of the world, at the earliest, late April, but usually it's early May before they start, and depending on where you are and water temperatures and such, it could run to almost the end of May.
So that's a good early season pattern.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
But you typically use Zap-A-Gap on as head
Yeah,
cement on?
yeah. I like the applicator. You can put just a little tiny bit precisely where you need it. Once you learn how to use it, it works very well. I like the green label Zap-A-Gap as opposed to the pink. The pink is very thin and watery, and it tends to wick into the materials too easily. And what's the sense of tying a fly using nice buoyant materials and turning them into a hunk of plastic?
Plastic, right.
You know. So this tends to stay where you put it a little bit better. Now what we're going to do next is a sulfur quill paraspinner. It's a parachute spinner pattern, and it's posted so you can see it. A lot of people I've found don't like to fish with spinners, even though they're very effective, especially here on the Delaware. We get some really prolific spinner falls, and the reason is, well, I can't see my fly. Well, this little tiny post we're going to leave on it really makes a difference, and I like using fluorescent posts. The brighter the color, the easier it is to see. So we'll use some, and the color of the post can be arbitrary. It's up to you. If you like fluorescent orange better than chartreuse, I've had people tell me that their eye picks up. I have one customer that insists on yellow post. He said he picks it up better. I don't know how individual that is, but apparently to him it makes a difference. So for him, I tie them with a yellow post. But I'm going to use chartreuse for this, and we're just going to tie in an Antron post to begin this fly. And we want to get the post upright to create a base to wrap the hackle wing around later on.
So you tie the post on first.
Absolutely. And you want to reinforce the post to stiffen it, because later on we're going to be wrapping hackle around it. You want to give it some stiffness and strength. So we'll use thread to build up a nice stiff post. And now we'll proceed back to just above the point of the barb on this hook as our tie-in point for the tail. And I don't know if you can see it, but I've created a small ball of thread right over the back end of the barb of the hook. And I'm going to use microfibers for tails. You can use hackle for tails if you like. With one of the things that's happened with it seems the genetically grown necks, we got great feathers now, but seems to be less tail material on them. So these microfibers work well, but they work best when they're splayed. That's why we're going to put that little ball there. And then we're going to splay them by simply tying the thread into the front side of the ball, and you'll see how the fibers splayed.
Yep.
Okay. Over here I've got a couple of quills dyed sulfur orange soaking in just water. And that's going to form our body. It'll give us a nice thin silhouette on the water.
And you tie that with the tip of that.
Yes. Yeah, you want to work with the narrow end. And once it's soaked, they become nice and flexible. So you can easily wrap them up. And leave yourself just a little space behind the wing, because we're going to dub there for the thorax anyway. Now, I'm using a primrose colored thread just to make sure that the hackle or the hackle stem doesn't split while you're fishing it. You just figure eight loosely a few wraps of thread over, back to the tail, and then back forward. It just reinforces, it makes the fly just a little bit more durable. For the spinner wing, I'm going to use barred Plymouth Rock or grizzly hackle. And this is on a size 14 hook. I want the wing, for the wing I'm going to use what perhaps might be, you might consider a size 12 hackle, just slightly larger than it would take for the hook size. I'm going to strip some fibers off, and I'm going to tie it in almost parallel to the hook shank on my side. Leaving about a half a turn around the stem of bare stem behind it. That way you won't get any wild fibers. You'll allow the hackle to start its turn. Take out some sulfur dubbing. Dub it nice and tightly around the thread. I think I'm going to need a little more. Come behind and fill in that gap we left, and then come forward, and then back over. Now you've got a nice full thorax of beaver dubbing. Now we're going to wrap the hackle. And we're not going to use too many turns. We're only going to use 4 turns, and you want to start down low as you can, and squeeze each succeeding turn under. So many times I'll look at commercially tied flies, and you'll see these pretty nicely tied parachutes, but the hackle is way up here on the post somewhere where it doesn't come in contact with the water. To recoin an old phrase, at the lower end of the post is where the rubber meets the road and supports the hackle can support the fly. I'm going under, and then under again. Now, we're going to tie it off by wrapping the thread underneath all the hackle turns. We're not going to tie it in conventionally by pulling up and tying off on the eye. Now the hackle is tied in. All you got to do is slip your points of your scissors underneath and trim out the feather. I'll now roll the vise over and bring the thread back and wiggle it up through all these fibers. A couple more reinforcing wraps at the top. It's important here to grab the post to take tension off the thread while you give yourself some slack. Make 1 half hitch. And trim. Now, because it's a spinner, we want to do a couple more things to make this, and we want to give the hackle a spinner wing configuration. So we'll trim a V out in front and back. And now you've got your spent wing configuration. This post is also way too high. We're going to trim it down to a nub. And the last step is the Zappa gap. Just just enough to get the post wet. You don't want a big glop of glue there. And there is your posted spinner. Now, that's a fly that even towards dark you'll be able to spot on the water. And it'll give you an extra 10 minutes or 15 minutes of fishing. It doesn't sound like much, but I'm sure a lot of us have spent a lot of time squinting at that hour of the evening. One of the very popular patterns has become Fran Better's pattern, the usual, which is a three-step fly, wing, tail, and body. And I played around with it and came up with a two-step usual that I call the unusual. And again, it calls for rabbit's foot, only this time we're going to use the same section of rabbit foot for the wing and the tail. And this is a very buoyant fly because you've got an underbody of this rabbit's foot, which has a lot of natural buoyancy to it. So you're going to take one section of rabbit's foot and apply it to the hook shank with the tips rearward to form the tail, and the butts will form the wing. And after you measure it, again tightly, so it doesn't roll around on you, just wrap the thread back. This is a fly that almost anyone can tie. Secure it tightly at the tail. There's the tails, or shuck, whatever the fish take it to be, I don't know. And then dam it up in front to form the wing. I love simple patterns. Take your thumbnail and splay it. Actually, you should trim it first. We've got some wild fibers here. Once you get it trimmed, then you can splay. There you go. Splay it like one of Fran's, in the configuration of one of Fran's other patterns, the haystack, which used a deer hair wing. But we're going to do the same thing using the rabbit's foot. And my favorite color for sulfurs, believe it or not, is this very bright fluorescent orange. For some reason the fish eat it like popcorn. And this fly has worked to the point where it's pretty much all I use when sulfurs are on. And all you have to do now is wrap the body and the fly is done. I'll use a double whip. Doesn't get easier than that.
It couldn't possibly get easier than that.
It doesn't get easier than that. And here's a fly that you can use in a variety of colors. I use it for olives and Cahills and sulfurs and Hendricksons and everything else. And the fly works beautifully. The fish eat it. And people say, well, gee, what are they taking it for with that bright orange body? And I don't think about it too much. I don't really care. The fly works, and that's all I'm concerned with.
Well, one thing I think people forget is when you look at the dubbing, when it gets wet and it's on the water, it changes color. So a lot of flies, I think that when you actually look at the material and you think about when it's wet, what color will it be when it's on the water?
Especially when you put floatant on it.
Right.
It darkens to a certain extent. But if I can expound briefly on this, I think way too much attention is paid to color. Too many flies have been, or too many fish rather, have been caught during a light Cahill hatch on an Adams, because the fish lives in a backlit world. Everything, its entire world is backlit. And if your camera was set up behind me looking out the window, you wouldn't have the visibility because of the excess light coming in from that angle. That's the fish's world. He's constantly looking into a backlit surrounding. So, especially as regards dry flies, I think way too much color or attention is paid to color.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Let's work a little bit on a March Brown parachute. Now this is a bigger bug, and I call this specifically a Delaware March Brown parachute because I've matched the color of the body of the fly to those on the Delaware. You can go to fly shops and you'll see literally a half a dozen or more colors of March Brown dubbing. The best way to figure out what color the March Browns are or the stream you're fishing is to pick one up and turn it over. And that's what I've been able to do here. So again, we're going to use an Antron wing. And we'll use the same method of stiffening the post as we did on the paraspinner. Now, in this watershed, our March Browns are quite large, so I'm tying this on a size 10 hook. And because I'm tying it on a size 10 hook, I'm going to use a different tail material. For the larger flies, the microfibers, especially after a fish or two, don't seem to support the fly as well. So I'm going to use guard hairs from a woodchuck tail. And I don't want them all clumped together like a paintbrush. I like a little staggered look to it. So I'm just going to pull out the long and the short fibers and loosely line them up. So they're, I don't know, sort of lined up, I guess. And this is a great material for tailing, especially on large bugs. I use the woodchuck tail for all my drakes and Isonychia and larger patterns. It really supports the fly on the water. Okay, and we're going to make this fly pretty. We're going to make a pretty fly. And by that we're going to add a back and a rib and just something that's a little more, to a dry fly, most of this stuff that we're going to do now means nothing to the trout because he's looking at it from below. But if it pleases you to tie a pretty fly, this ought to help you out. We're going to put a back on it, and I'm going to use again some fibers from a pheasant tail, wild turkey tail, whatever feather you have on your bench will work fine. And just let the rib and the shell back hang back. Now, Kurt, you and I were talking about dubbings before and colors and you know how sometimes I think it's overrated, but then by the same token, I guess if you're going to tie it, you might as well tie it correctly. So I blended up. This color is exactly the shade of the abdomen of a March Brown here in our watershed. And one of the advantages of using the beaver dubbing is that it blends so beautifully. You can take for this one I used a yellow and a white and just put it in one of the those little, if you're one of those folks that likes to grind their own coffee beans, they work, it blends beautifully.
But you can't use it for coffee if they're right.
Well, if you don't mind spitting out a little verge, roughage. Okay, now we've applied the thorax, or the abdomen rather, and we'll pull up these fibers for the back. And tie it in behind the wing. Coming from your side, because we'll be wrapping the rib that way and it'll pull it over where it's supposed to be as we get further up the body. So we'll give it a nice ribbed effect. And I think I've got 6 wraps there. Mayflies, I believe, if memory serves, have 9 segments, but God bless trout, they can't count. And we trim that away. Now, there you go. You've got your back, your abdomen is tied in. Now it's time for hackles. And for the March Brown, I like a lighter colored hackle. I'm going to use a medium ginger rather than a dark brown. And we're going to mix that with a grizzly. This one's getting pretty well picked out. And we're going to tie them both in, again, with the bare stem parallel pretty much to the hook shank on my side. Trap it and then tighten down and make sure it's nice and secure. Now we'll dub the thorax. Start dubbing right over the eye and work back to the post. And bring the thread around the base of the post and let it hang on your side ahead of the post. Now the best way to do this is to wrap both hackles simultaneously. Turn the vise towards you slightly and come under. And then with the thread under again, tightly against the base of the post, and trim. I first saw another New York tire, Del Mazza, tie parachutes in this manner, and it was better than anything I was doing, and it's amazingly durable. Again, wiggle it up through the fibers. A couple of reinforcing wraps. Trim. Just secure everything
and
with that.
You're tying it off around
On the top of the post.
On the post. Right?
On the post. And there's a Delaware March Brown.
Wow. Now that's a pretty fly. And what time of the year would you be using that?
Late May.
Late May?
Yeah, probably the third week of May on, maybe into early June, again depending on seasonal conditions, climatic conditions.
Well, I think we covered quite a bit for one show here today, and I want to thank you again, Mike, for allowing me to come into your home like this and barge in on your fly tying. You know, you're making a living here. You got to see this.
Kurt Nelson,
What?
I came home and told you that very thing, but you didn't pay me. No, never mind.
I did too.
You did not.
I did too.
You put your car in and you went back to playing that stupid